Welcome back to the Balance Breakdown, folks. We are here to discuss UFC Vegas 86, Jack Hermansson versus Joe Pyfer. We're going to go on a hot and heavy pace to get through this. It's late in London for Harry Powell. We got to get this man to bed. So we're going to race through this card relatively quickly. A little bit of chit-chat about UFC 300 towards the end of this. A couple of thoughts both Harry and I want to kind of share on that card itself. So we're going to fit that in at the end. We didn't really have time. We don't really have time on the setup to do it this week. We're going to cover that UFC 298 card in full. So let's get into it, Harry. Jack Hermansson versus Joe Pyfer, straight in the middleweight division. We asked a lot of questions about where both of these guys were at on the setup last week. And it was a big kind of a proven fight to see where exactly Joe Pyfer was, in my opinion. Jack Hermansson, I think, did Jack Hermansson things in there. He produced the level of performances that he's able to. I think he fought very well, didn't get strayed too much from his game plan. And I feel that Joe Pyfer more so will be looking at this fight as a fight that, he'll learn a lot from. He made a couple of errors, I believe, in shot selection. Obviously took a lot of the damage and that big shot, like we chatted beforehand, did kind of change the fight as well. But maybe I'll hand it over to you to kind of break down what you've seen on the fight, and we can kind of stem off from another few conversations that may happen from that.
So I think Joe Pyfer's really, really good when he's in the ascendancy. He hits really hard. He's got a really gorgeous left hook to the body, right hand over the top. And he was using that really effectively against Jack Hermansson. There was some nice leg kicks and there was some nice teeps. I think when he is throwing and he is landing, he's really good because he hits really hard. And he was affecting Jack Hermansson in those first two rounds. And Joe Pyfer is the kind of guy that the judges love because when he hits, they're always impactful. And so it's easy to score, right? It's easy to score. The person that's getting hit by Joe Pyfer, they have to react. They have to defend themselves. They have to make adjustments. And that's exactly what Jack Hermansson did. He started to look and time for that overhand right. And he would find himself out of the pocket. He'd pull that overhand right from Joe Pyfer and start to land his own left hand. And there was a moment in the third round, about a minute in, when Jack Hermansson landed just a beautifully crisp left straight directly under the eye of Joe Pyfer, the right eye of Joe Pyfer. And I think immediately Joe Pyfer thought it was an eye poke because he looked at the ref to sort of be like, what are we doing here? Was that a legal shot? Was it not a legal shot? But certainly it's broken something in Joe Pyfer's sort of orbital region because he reeled away and then Jack Hermansson swarmed him a little bit, landed a couple of really nice shots, specifically a right hook behind the glove. And from then the fight just completely changed for Joe Pyfer. I think that injury really, really started to tell that Joe Pyfer was worried about taking shots, and so as a result took more shots. He was a little bit more wary of throwing his own shots because he didn't want to get countered. When he did throw, he still landed with really, really nice damage, but Jack Hermansson just was able to up the volume and was able to outland Joe Pyfer until that very fifth round. I thought this was a really interesting tactical decision that Jack Hermansson made, which was he wasn't going to wrestle Joe Pyfer. He was going to specifically defensively wrestle whenever Joe Pyfer shot, which, he did do it. He did very, very well. I thought single leg defense from Jack Hermansson was absolutely fantastic throughout the entire fight until that fifth round. And then in the fifth round, he knew that Joe Pyfer was tired. He knew that Joe Pyfer had taken damage. And so he took the easy takedown and just rode him out for the entire round because he knew the gas tank wasn't going to be there for Joe Pyfer to make big explosions to get back up. And obviously Jack Hermansson's very, very, very comfortable from the top position. So from that third round adjustment and really draining some of that gas tank from somebody like Joe Pyfer, I think this was a really, really good example of how a less athletic, less explosive fighter can drag a man over 5 rounds and win that way.
Yeah, it's just experience as well, Harry. You know what I mean? And not kind of getting, not straying away from the game plan. I think, I spoke with you a little bit before we started recording. On the opening exchange, Joe Pyfer hurt Jack Hermansson with a big left hook, and he fell in love with that shot after that. It can happen. You hit somebody, you hurt somebody, you want to go back there to try and get him out of there. He over-relied on his power shots as opposed to working behind his jab to set up those shots. I feel, that's a big thing that he's going to learn. Like, Jack Hermansson was out jabbing him rounds 3, rounds 4. And that's not really a good sign either. Look at that. Obviously, that shot that hurt him in round 3, that was a big game changer. But I think the writing was beginning to come on the wall even before that shot happened, with Hermansson kind of turning the screw a little bit. I feel Joe Pyfer is very open on the feet, and he's going to really have to kind of shore up his defensive game inside the pocket if he does come in here and fight a kind of more highly skilled striker, because Hermansson isn't known for his striking. He's decent on the feet, but he's more so known as a grappler. And he did piece up Pyfer in certain regards. But like, Pyfer's face was fairly busted up at the end of the fight, and I do believe it was that over reliance on those power shots. And he'll learn that lesson. He's young. He'll go back to the drawing board. He'll be back. I think he started using a calf kick early days as well, and kind of abandoned that as the fight went on. But when you get drawn into deep waters, Harry, we said that was going to be the key here, is that how was he going to perform in deep waters? And sometimes when you get to those deep waters, if you're not experienced, your game plan goes out the window, and you're more so just trying to get in there and survive and stuff like that. And that's kind of what happened in this one, really, wasn't it?
I agree. I think I saw lots of things that I really liked about Joe Pyfer, though. Really liked about him. He's tough, he's gritty, he hits really hard. I really love his willingness to go to the body. I just think it's going to take, this was his first sort of sniff at that elite level. And there's no shame whatsoever in losing to a fighter like Jack Hermansson.
For sure.
Specifically in the way that he did lose. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And so he will take a lot from this specific loss, and I do expect him to come back a lot stronger.
Absolutely, I do as well. 27 years of age. Look, as we said, this was a good opportunity for him to see if he was ready now. He wasn't ready. He'll be back, and I'm excited to see how he progresses coming into the next fight as well. Co-main event, Dan Ige versus Andre Fili. No surprises in the result of this one, really, Harry. Ige always coming in there with that big power, way more sophisticated on the feet with his striking. Fili taking this fight at short notice, a very wild striker. And when you are going in there with Dan Ige, who has an educated jab and knows how to set up his shots, that's exactly what he did against Andre Fili. Big check right hook, followed up by some ground and pound. Got Andre Fili out of there in the first round. And it's we shall move on with Dan Ige now.
Yeah, I wrote in my notes that I want to see Dan Ige fight Arnold Allen next, because that is a fight that has not happened yet. For me, though, for Dan Ige and Andre Fili, this was exactly the fight that I thought it was going to happen. Andre Fili's long, he's rangy, and I think my word would be loose rather than wild. He takes a shot to give a shot at times, and we also know that sometimes a really fantastic Andre Fili turns up, and sometimes a less fantastic Andre Fili turns up. And I just think with Dan Ige, he knew all he had to do was get inside, and he got inside twice, and he knocked him out with the second shot. That's it, done.
100%. I did forget to ask you about Jack Hermansson and who you wanted him to fight.
Winner
next.
of Paulo Costa versus Robert Whittaker.
Boom. And Joe Pyfer?
I wouldn't mind Caio Borralho, but I know he has a matchup at the moment. But I wouldn't mind if Caio Borralho wins against his guy, let's do that. I still want to keep Joe Pyfer in and around the picture that he is right now, right? I think that's a good place for him to be. I don't need to see him dropped dramatically down, but in and around there is where I like him.
100%. Moving on, you have a public service announcement to make about Igor Potiera versus who took on and beat Robert Bryczek in the light heavyweight. Was it light? No, it was in the middleweight division.
I'd like to cut them both, please. Both awful. Absolutely awful. I don't know what to tell you. Just neither of these fellas wanted to win the fight. There were dick kicks, there were eye pokes, there were fucking random Potiera sweep spinning karate kid bollocks that Bryczek just stepped away and looked at him like, fella, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what the fuck are you doing? Potiera stands there with his hands down after he'd just been clipped, asking Bryczek to hit him again. Just disgusting. Bryczek has nothing but basically a barreled right hand. Like, and then the one time Potiera manages to land and lands really, really well in that third round, drops Bryczek, who scrambles back up to his feet. And then what does he do? Wrestles him. Forget it. Sack him. Get rid of them both. Horrendous.
Nightmare for Harry Powell trying to analyze that one a bit. How many times was the head in the hands, Harry, for this one?
I think I watched it through my fingers. Yeah.
100%. Potiera to be claiming to be the next big thing in the middleweight division. I think your assessment there was pretty fair. Not a high quality fight. Neither one of these guys are going to make a big rush up the 185-pound division. Did you even have anybody that you would like to see any of these guys fight left? I assume it's their walking papers is what you want, but unfortunately, we're probably going to see Igor Potiera back there again. Who would you want to see him against?
Give him Joe Pyfer.
Joe Pyfer, yeah. I mean, that's a good kind of comeback fight.
Destroy Igor Potiera in like 45 seconds. It'd be disgusting. It'd be finished quick. Do that. Yeah, do that. Go on, do that. Yeah, go on, do that.
You're evil Harry Powell this late night in London. Gregory Rodrigues versus Brad Tavares was up there for my fight of the night. It was a fantastic fight. And look at Rodrigues. We know where he's capable of, a bona fide madman at the best of times, but he produced, I think, the best performance of his UFC career so far, because it's not easy to go out there and do what he did against Brad Tavares. Put the pressure on, put him on the back foot, land some big strikes, and basically just drowned him before getting the finish in round 3. It was unbelievable to look at. And what we may have lacked in that Potiera Bryczek fight is what we gained in this kind of a fight. And this was brilliant stuff from both guys. And Brad Tavares did well to keep in this fight for as long as he could. But Rodrigues was too hungry and wanted that win so bad against Tavares and did also well to get that finish in round 3 as well.
Tavares was by far the more technical, speedy, crafty, veteran guy, and we kind of know. And don't get me wrong, Brad Tavares is coming towards the end of his career. That's a couple of knockouts now in the last couple of fights where he was that Kelvin Gastelum guy where you just couldn't fucking finish him. He was just a cinder block that you just bash your hands against and just nothing would happen. But Rodrigues, he shows you what power can be. He shows you what power can be as sort of a real like superpower, and that is exactly what happened. Brad Tavares just could not get away from RoboCop. He just couldn't get him to respect him. He just couldn't get him to take a step back. And those shots just land and land and land and land and land. And they're big, heavy blows and they're big, heavy blows. And Tavares just did his best to survive. But eventually, you can only take so much. And I have the fight, by the way.
Give it to me. Give it to me.
RoboCop versus Chris Curtis. Let's see it.
Oh yes, I love that one. How far do you see Rodrigues kind of making a couple of moves up the middleweight? Like, I mean, I was blown away by this performance, to be honest, because we haven't seen too many people go in there and do that against Brad Tavares, to be honest. And like with Rodrigues, that's going to give him an abundance of confidence here. He's 31. He has time to make a bit of a run in a not really talented middleweight division, but you know, we've seen chinks in the armor before. He does get into these kind of wars and it can kind of hurt him a little bit, and it probably would hurt him in a fight with Chris Curtis. So that's why it's an excellent kind of matchup, because you know, it is Chris Curtis. He is more technical, has power as well, but it's more so with Rodrigues is that if he can calm that, as you call it, mad bastardry a little bit, he has the ability to cause a little bit of damage at 185.
So I'll answer the question. How far does he go? Not far.
Yeah, it's fair. That's fair.
And it's not far because he loves a war. And you just can't win titles when you love wars. You just can't win them. And the thing the reason why I like the Chris Curtis fight is because Chris Curtis is very defensively sound, right? Very defensively sound. He's got good head movement. He can move his hands really well, moves his feet well. And he always complains that fighters don't try and finish him. That fighters aren't pushing the pace against him, that fighters aren't doing enough, that he's got to carry the... Well, RoboCop is going to come out there and from second one, he's going to try to take your fucking chin off your head. And so I'm interested to see mostly two things, two outcomes that I'm really happy with. We go and see a Chris Curtis defensive masterclass, and I really enjoy watching those. Or we see Robocop fucking decimate another fella. And I'm happy watching that as well, frankly. So I like that fight.
Yeah, I like it as well. A fight that you didn't like, Harry, was Michael Johnson versus Darrius Flowers. Did you see anything? I know you're shaking your head there. I'm not certain that you would have seen anything to make you like this fight even after it happened.
Like, this is Darrius Flowers is really bad. Like, I don't know what to tell you. He's really bad. There was a moment in the second round where he threw an overhand left so hard he knocked himself down. Like, that is insane. Like, it's absolutely insane. But for Michael Johnson, this is just exactly how Michael Johnson fights go. He's long, he's rangy, and he controls the fight for 2 rounds, and then he gets hurt randomly in a position where he absolutely has no need to get hurt in, and then ends up on bottom and getting smashed up for a round. Like, just Darrius Flowers shouldn't be holding a flame to Michael Johnson, even at this late stage in his career. And so how he still finds a way to hurt him and in that last third round, give a sniff of winning a round is beyond me. But yeah, just a horrible fight altogether. Just not even necessarily because of Johnson's performance. I think Johnson performed just fine in those first 2 rounds, but just the optics of Johnson just basically being in first or second gear for the first 2 rounds and then finding a way to get clipped, get hurt, and then ending up on bottom. It's just the optics of it. It's just trash. Like,
yeah, it's like, look, Darrius Flowers is 12-7-1 for his record now. It's like, it's tough watching these kind of fights, and this was a really tough card, and this is why we're kind of storming through it too, to be honest, because there's not really too much to speak about here with a lot of these fights. We're going to really blast through the prelim section of this card. We will kind of spend a little bit of time on Rodolfo Vieira and Armen Petrosayn, who did kind of square off in the middleweight division. Okay, go ahead. Oh, fights next.
Johnson versus Terence McKinney. Thanks very much.
Very good, very good. On to Rodolfo Vieira versus Armen Petrosayn. Very solid performance here from Rodolfo Vieira. Didn't mess around. Went in there, knew what he needed to do. It was a kind of an interesting stylistic matchup, in Armen Petrosayn being probably the better striker of the two. So you do what you do in that situation, Harry. You get the fight down. You move into mount and you secure that head and arm choke from a mounted position. That is not easy to do. It was one thing when I was looking at this, I was very curious to hear your breakdown of the sequence of events that led to Rodolfo Vieira's win.
So the reason I chose Rodolfo Vieira for the severe spotlight this week is because, following a similar trajectory as last week when I picked Molly McCann, is it's difficult for fighters to add new wrinkles. Jeez, I've done it again. New wrinkles. That's the name of this episode. Is adding new skills at a later stage in your career. Now, Rodolfo Vieira obviously is relatively new to MMA, but he is not new to combat sports. And I think it's actually even harder for somebody that is so deep in the trenches of one specific sport to then adapt to a brand new sport and throw away some of like an exceeding amount of the knowledge that Rodolfo Vieira has for sport grappling. Just doesn't work in MMA. It just doesn't exist. And so for Rodolfo to come in and show a willingness to remove a lot of the knowledge that he already has about the game of sport grappling and to bring it into the fighting arts is already really impressive to me. But and he had a game plan. He and his team, definitely. I'd love to ask him, but they had a game plan. It was 2 minutes on the feet, and then we take him down. And that's literally exactly what happened. He stood with Armen Petrosayn. He cut really nice angles on the outside. He was catching and parrying shots well. Okay, he took a few too many leg kicks, and we can go away. We can fix that as a team. But he had a really solid jab. He worked the body quite nicely. There was some really nice basic striking, and I don't mean that disrespectfully at all. It's exactly what Armen Petrosayn should be doing. Exactly what Rodolfo Vieira should be doing. And remember, this is Armen Petrosayn, the storied kickboxer, right? This isn't just some random scrub wrestler that he's just doing this to. This is Armen Petrosayn who's come in, has a war with Gregory Rodrigues, right? Knows how to strike, knows what he's doing. And then immediately on the 3-minute mark, after 2 minutes, Rodolfo Vieira ducks underneath, grabs a single leg, and we're basically done. Armen Petrosayn does an okay job at defending, but every single time, Rodolfo is just a step ahead every single time. And you ask specifically about the mount. There's a moment where Rodolfo picks up Armen Petrosayn and chooses, do I want to put him in the middle of the cage where he has maybe less space to wall walk, but maybe has a little bit of space to start getting away from me and turtling and these things, or do I want to chuck him against the fence? He opted for the fence, and he immediately moved into high tripod passing, body lock passing. There's a moment where you see Armen Petrosayn square up his hips and pummel some butterfly hooks in, and you think that is a good piece of work from Armen Petrosayn, and it is not. It is Rodolfo Vieira squaring up the hips so he can pass directly into mount. And when he does so, we are absolutely done here. Now, we'll just walk through the head and arm triangle finish that Rodolfo chose to go for. What Rodolfo chose to do is not completely dismount from full mount. Instead, he left his left leg inside the mounted position. Why did he do this? Well, he did this because he wants to negate two reactions from Armen Petrosayn. The first is that Armen Petrosayn starts to hip out and starts to create space to suck his elbow underneath the choke. And when Rodolfo's left leg is isometrically hamstring curling the left leg of Armen Petrosayn, it's very difficult for Armen to then move his hips away. The second reaction is he doesn't want Armen Petrosayn to try and build up into him, building into the choke to, again, try and suck his elbow free. So what's he doing? Well, he's sprawling through that left hip. So there are two movements, two mechanics that he's employing with that left leg to pin Armen Petrosayn to that specific position. With the head and arm itself, you don't get to see the nuances of it, so I'll just talk you briefly through the nuances of what he's doing. When he's in the mount, you see him win what we call a one-arm chest wrap, where he's got Armen Petrosayn's arm up next to his head. And you'll notice that Rodolfo turns his chin over the tricep of Armen Petrosayn. That allows him now to work with his hands unlocked so he can deepen that choke as much as possible whilst keeping Armen Petrosayn's choking arm, the arm that's choking himself with, really, across his face. That's a beautiful detail. Absolutely phenomenal. Then
normally when you're looking for a head and arm choke, this is what I was interested to ask you in this position. We've seen it a couple of times before. When you're going in there and securing the head and arm, what you're kind of taught to do in one movement is kind of get out past into side control and then go anti-clockwise against the choke to kind of tighten it up. Because he didn't cut that angle, are you applying more shoulder pressure, downward shoulder pressure, to kind of maybe lock in that choke a little bit better, as opposed to kind of cutting the angle to lock in the choke there?
So I think cutting the angle is actually a legacy way of thinking to finish the choke now. And generally the finishing mechanics for when you would cut an angle is you're thinking about bringing your elbow down through the clavicle and you're choking with the bicep. Now, the more modern mechanics are that you're completing both an esophagus choke and a blood choke at the same time. So Rodolfo is flexing his bicep to one side of the carotid artery. He is forcing his head into his Armen Petrosayn's bicep, which is then cutting off the second carotid artery, and he's dragging his shoulder directly through the esophagus, very similar to how you'd finish a rear naked choke. So it's like an extremely concentric choke now, and its mechanics are slightly different to how they used to be when you were cutting an angle. Cutting an angle, you can absolutely still get finishes, but because you are not following or tracking the hips, sometimes your partner can start to turn into you much, much, much easier, which is why I think when we see more modern grapplers look and finish for head and arm chokes, you're going to see them not fully dismount from top.
Yeah, very well explained. Thanks. That was high level, that simplified high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu right there. Serious stuff. And that was about as good a breakdown as you're going to get on that finish of events as well, or sequence of events, shall we say. Moving on, Carlos Prates versus Trevin Giles. I like this fight. It was an exciting fight. Maybe not the highest of quality, but it was a lovely knockout by Prates over Trevin Giles. It was a fight that was over and back a little bit. It was hard to know which way it was going to go, and obviously that killer blow came in the second round where Prates landed that nice straight right left down the pipe, got the knockout, and it was all said and done. Did you enjoy this one, Harry? There was a good bit of sequence of events in here.
Yeah, good action-packed fight. I think Prates might struggle with that really, really, really heavy Muay Thai style. And I mean, if you didn't know he liked Muay Thai, he has it tattooed on his chest. So just in case there is any worries that he doesn't, that you think he's a grappler, he's got Muay Thai written. So,
that's hilarious. He's reminding everybody. That's why I wonder, does he walk around the streets with his t-shirt on, and then just kind of maybe pull it up randomly just to kind of let everybody know, or maybe he's the type of fella that just walks around with no t-shirt so that people know all the time that he likes.
They know all the time because he walks with that same heavy leg Muay Thai stance everywhere. You see him in 7-Eleven, he's got that fucking lead leg bouncing. But, over and back, I thought the kicks are good, right? Like, that's what we expect from a Muay Thai practitioner. His kicks are good. I think what's going to need some adjustment, especially in the UFC at the UFC level, is not getting crowded with shots in the striking range, because Trevin Giles was able to crowd him a little bit with shots. But I was very, very impressed with the finishing sequence. Throws a big knee, misses the big knee, comes immediately back with the right hand, and then sets Trevin Giles up beautifully for that left hand. It reminded me, now let's not get too serious, but it reminded me a little bit of Sean O'Malley in the way that sort of same physique, long, quite lanky, quite skinny, and he just catches Trevin Giles right at the end of that shot. Really full extension, full rotation of the shoulders, and the way that Trevin Giles fell was like, I mean, that's what happens to Sean O'Malley's opponents, right? He just knocks them dead, and the eyes are rolling back. And I don't know that Prates is going to do big things in that welterweight division. I think there's some significant skill acquisition that needs to happen there. But he's going to be a fun fighter, right? Any fighter that can fight long and put people to sleep like that, fair enough. I'm with you.
Yeah, like, definitely. Look, an exciting fighter, but he got in some sticky situations there with a guy in Trevin Giles he's not a guy that you should be if you're anyway good at all, and that's things that he's going to have to shore up in his game going on in his UFC career. But it was an exciting fight, and it was a lovely knockout as well. I really enjoyed it, and you broke it down quite well. I'm going to bring everybody through the prelims, the rest of the card. Bolashi Oki picked up a split decision win over Timmy Kuamba in the 155-pound division. Close fight. I mean, the judges scored it as a close fight. Loma Lukboni, Bruno Brazil went to action. It was a typical Loma Lukboni and Bruno Brazil's type of fight in the both rounds. Kind of Loma Lukboni did neither one of these fighters have any power, to be honest. And when you don't have any impactful power, you're always going to be in these unanimous decision or somewhat closer fights. And look at it, was a unanimous decision 29-28, I believe, in all three judges' scorecards. I agreed with that. I was interested to see how Bruno Brazil obviously did against Loma Lukboni, having picked up a win over Sean O'Bannon. She'll be disappointed. On another night she could have got that win. She moves to 9-4 now, so she will be back, I'm sure, but neither one of these I could see going on to do any major things at 115, but we'll see what happens. Good learning fight for Bruno Brazil, I think. Marcin Pacino took out Devin Clark by unanimous decision in the light heavyweight division. Nothing really to write home about in that fight. That's why we're not really spending any time here. Another split decision here, Max Griffin versus Jeremiah Wells. Typical Max Griffin fight, just kind of hard-nosed, gritty, gets the job done. Wells pressed forward, was landing some big shots. Split decision, can't really argue with it too much. Bogdan Guskov took out Zach Pauga with a nice knockout early days on this card. Zach Pauga he is the guy who came off the Ultimate Fighter season, has had a horrible run since that, to be honest, really, hasn't he? Hasn't really worked out for him at all. Even the move down to light heavyweight hasn't really worked for him either, so he might get his marching papers fairly soon, given the results that he's been having. Hyder Amil at 145 took out another nice standing TKO over Fernie Garcia in the featherweight division. He moves to 9-0. Interesting undefeated prospect coming in here, but he's 33 years of age. Time's a ticking, and he's got to get it moving. But I think old father time will not be his friend in any if I feel he's going to progress in the UFC. And the opening fight of the night was an absolute banger to begin with, to be honest. I went and looked back at it, and it was a banger until we had an unintentional groin strike. The fight was called a no contest. Daniel Marcus remains undefeated. Arichalang, unable to continue. And the fight was called, put them back in together again. That's the quick rundown of the card. These UFC, I think we'll round this off by just giving an explanation here about where we're at with these UFC Apex cards. And it's very hard to get invested in these kind of cards, and that's why we will be kind of maybe using this format where we're not getting as in-depth with a lot of our analysis, more so bringing you results, telling you what you should be looking at, what you shouldn't be looking at. A couple of good fights on this card. Hermansson, Pyfer, definitely worth looking back. Igor, Fili, definitely worth looking back. Gregory, Rodrigues, like we said, Brad Tavares, well worth a watch. Rodolfo, Vieira's finish. I actually think Harry Powell's analysis of the finish was actually better than watching the finish, so I don't think you even need to do anything on that. Prates, Giles, interesting, kind of exciting fight, but the rest of the prelims, not really too much more to write home. I know you feel the same about these cards as well. You know, I don't know if anybody cares or anything like that, but you know, when we watch this fight, we want to give you the best analysis as possible. So like Harry, I think you explained it perfect. It's not sitting down and with a beer and just kind of watching it and going through the motions. We have to concentrate. We have to kind of find these little things, especially you're the lead analyzer here between the two of us. To be honest, we rely on your analysis quite a lot. So I know you take great pride in your analysis, and it does take time. But let's be real, some of these fights are just not worth getting into in that way, and that's why we chose not to do it this time on the balance breakdown. Hopefully you guys understand, but I'm sure you will. And I know that you feel the same about these kind of cards as well. The Apex cards are really, really tough to kind of get into and get invested in these days, Harry.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, the other side of it is, you know, this endeavor, and this isn't a woe is us type thing, but this endeavor is it takes away a lot from our personal lives, right? Like that UFC card is 7 hours long that Ian sits through every Saturday, and then he's doing the big podcast here, now, there, and everywhere, because, you know, that's who he is, right? Big podcast Ian O'Neill. And then myself, I generally take, you know, 3 or 4, 5 hours sometimes out of my Sunday with my wife to write my article and watch the fights and get all my notes ready. You know, I've got let me just pull that up here. I've got a OneDrive folder, and in that OneDrive folder is all the notes that I have taken. I started to collate them. So in here there are how many documents? We've got 41 documents in here, and I would say, other than today, none of them are shy of at least 3,000 to 4,000 words, right? So I try and go as deep as I can with the analysis, so that when we come and when we talk about these fights, we can talk about them and give something to you. But sometimes it's just very, very difficult when we're looking at these types of cards and we're sort of discussing them to get up for it. And especially when it's low quality, like it's very hard. It's actually harder to analyze low quality fights than it is to analyze high quality fights, because you just don't know what they're doing. And I don't think they necessarily know what they're doing either. They're just out there fighting on impulse, and you know, that's far less enjoyable for us to cover. It's far less enjoyable for us to watch, and we want to be as invested as possible so that we can give you the best possible content. So that's where we are.
That's where we are. Moving on to something that we actually do want to talk about, and that's the UFC 300 main event. I don't know what the hell is going on here, Harry. We're 7 weeks out from this main event. We had John Jones coming out last week saying he was offered a fight. We have Dana White saying they could make a documentary about the making of this main event. All kinds of craziness going on. Tickets are on sale this Friday for having a Q&A session this Friday ahead of 298. I do believe something's got to be done. It has to be done. You can't put the tickets on sale. And they probably, I mean, I'd say you can't put it on without a main event. They have before. They've put out tickets with fights that haven't been fully finalized. So yeah, I guess I wouldn't be surprised if they did put it on without a main event. it's a weird time. You would think, Harry, in this case, that UFC would have everything together for a card of what we would claim to this be magnitude. The 300s, I think the 100 big card, 200 big card, and the 300 card should be treated as big as the previous ones as well. It doesn't seem that way. They're struggling real hard to get this main event over the line. What does it tell you?
All roads lead to Conor McGregor. Right? Like, okay, let's just quickly run down through. They're not going to put, you're not going to get Brock Lesnar to turn around in 7 weeks and come and fight somebody, right? If they turn around and do main event Tom Aspinall versus Brock Lesnar for the interim world heavyweight title, I'll eat my fucking hat. But like, I just can't see that happening. USADA or no USADA, I just can't see that happening. John Jones has already ruled himself out. Alex Bahia is probably too quick a turnaround, and there's not a drastic amount of people that he can fight. Israel Adesanya, I think he could, if he was in and around that title picture again, or that title picture was there to be contested with, I think you could put Israel Adesanya at the top of a UFC 300 card and sell it, regardless of whether it's against Strickland Super C or whether it's against Sean Strickland or whatever. I think that's a fight that works. Welterweight, Leon Edwards has been banded around, but Hamzat Chimaev has already said he's not fighting during Ramadan, so that's that fight away. And then Bilal Muhammad, I genuinely do think that they wanted to do that fight, Bilal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards. But I then think that the vitriol that came around it was just too much, and the UFC does at times listen to the public, so the public opinion, and I think that's probably a good choice for them. And then we're down at 155. Islam Makhachev's definitely not fighting during Ramadan, right? You can forget that. Alexander Volkanovski's fighting right now at 298, and they're not going to put a 135 fighter or a 125 fighter as the headliner of UFC 300. And so we're now looking.
Sean O'Malley, though, couldn't they? They could have, like, I mean, we're seeing a stacked 299 card, which is kind of making things a hell of a lot more difficult as well. The decision to kind of stack that card maybe is kind of a decision they might be regretting now, because that Sean O'Malley fight really slips into a main event slot here. You could get away with it. They obviously don't want to kind of rely on that smaller. They always kind of tend to rely on, well, I don't know, it's kind of harsh to say that. They want to rely on their stars, and Sean O'Malley is a bit of a star for them right now. Conor McGregor is a fighter that you mentioned. I think that it's too soon for him now at this stage. I think the Roadhouse movie is coming out next month, and he's going to have to do some small promotion there. But at the end of the day, money talks, really, doesn't it?
It does.
A gun to your head now, who do you think it's going to be?
Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler.
Really? I don't know, man. I just can't see it. I can see it. I can see Israel versus Dricus, but it all depends on how much money they want to pay Israel to come back early.
Yep.
How quickly Dricus recovered after that Sean Strickland, because it's a quick turnaround for him again, and I don't know whether that would be the best move for him, but
his eye got banged up too.
Yeah. There's not too much else out there really that is intriguing, unless they pull a rabbit out of a hat.
That is why I am saying it's Conor McGregor, because like, look, there's a video that's been released, or a couple of videos that have been released of McGregor sparring recently, right? You don't just get them. You know what I mean? Like, you don't just get them. Now, does that mean he's in fight camp? No, of course it fucking doesn't. It doesn't mean anything to do with whether he's in fight camp or not. I'm sure McGregor spars all the time as nauseum just to keep himself ticking over. But McGregor posted something quite cryptic during the Super Bowl, which was that he's coming to Vegas in the summer. And, obviously UFC 300 is not in the summer, right? But that he wants something left there for Vegas. Like, I just feel as though there is something in MMA, which is that Conor McGregor is sort of this inevitable star, right? And I could be wrong. Absolutely, I could be wrong. But the UFC have leaned on Conor McGregor and his star power over and over and over again. And over again, he has elevated the company to new levels. And it seems as though the litany of stars, or the litany of talent that they have there, they have absolutely fucked this main event scheduling. And we're now in a position where, yet again, the UFC needs somebody like Conor McGregor, and you announce Conor McGregor versus my nan, and that whole fucking place sells out.
Your poor nan, Jesus.
Bless her heart. But you just need that name. That name at the top of UFC 300 is what makes it, you know?
You do, but and if he gets paid, if it's a new deal and they restructure it and he comes back, is it the best move for Conor to be making it? I'm more along the lines that he will be introduced onto UFC International Fight Week on June 29th. That is when it's going down. I although Dana did say the fall, I think that is likely going to be the target date. He's pushing for that date. I think if he made the push late last year for 300 and it didn't happen. So now he's kind of focused his attention on that International Fight Week card. I just think it'd be a bad idea at this stage for Conor to take that fight and to go in there if he's not fully prepared. Tell me that I'm wrong.
I think you're wrong. I think that if we know one thing about Conor McGregor, it's that he is an MMA fanatic, right? Whether he's been in or out of the gym, and obviously there have been periods of time in his life that he's been out of the gym and doing other things and filming films and sitting on a fucking billion super yachts and whatever. But you will often see him tweeting just analysis of fights. He'll give props out to fighters on fight night when the fight card is happening. Whether or not he is in the gym and fully committed to being an athlete, he is an MMA fan and he keeps his finger on the pulse. And we also know that from documentaries of old and whatever, he also can sniff an opportunity. He is a really, really solid businessman. And it would not shock me in the slightest that the moment that John Jones had to pull out of UFC 300, he's like, sure, look, lads, roads lead to me. Like, he'll have looked at the landscape and said, well, Israel's not fighting right now. Sean O'Malley's in and around, but has been booked. And if my name's thrown in the hat next to Sean O'Malley, we both know who the UFC are picking. And oh man, I don't know. I feel like Conor is smart enough. Yes, okay, the Roadhouse and whatever, but he had to be a certain level of fitness and physique for Roadhouse. It's not like he filmed where his character was a fat slob, right? His character was in and around an athletic career. Now that's not the same as prepping for a fight camp.
Yeah. But I almost think he needed, like me and Sean talked about it on the big podcast not so long ago, whereas that you almost need that 8-week period to get yourself ready to go into that 8 to 12 week fight camp for McGregor.
My argument, though, is if he's already seen this coming, he's already in it. He's just waiting for the call.
Perhaps. Very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting. Let me throw a couple of other fights at you. Obviously, look at the big rumor was Belal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards. That's the easiest fight to put together. It would create a little bit of controversy, but in reality, is it going to kind of take away from the card? It's not your blockbuster main event. It just turns a, like, you know, a Conor McGregor fight makes it a blockbuster card, right? A Leon Edwards versus Belal Muhammad makes it an absolutely brilliant card because there's lots of other fights to complement it on it as well. But UFC could be at a stage where they have no other choice but to put Leon in there and Belal. I wonder how many people are in camp right now. That's what I'm wondering, waiting for the call. That's the thing. Look, at maybe the UFC just kind of cut their losses and announced that Leon and announced that Belal Muhammad fight and just kind of deal with the shit that comes with it when everyone will calm down and everybody will end up buying the card any which way. That's one option. I'll give you one other option. What about Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane for interim heavyweight championship?
So I've thought about this, and there was a very interesting article that came out today with an interview with one Tom Aspinall, and he said he's moved on from John Jones and Stipe Miocic. Those guys are now beneath him. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting, because only a month ago, you were making big, long Twitter statements about why John Jones should fight you and why this should be you and not that. And I'm like, okay, so what does that mean? Right? Very often, especially with a character like Tom Aspinall, you don't just say things for nothing, you know? So that statement that's come out now, obviously that's a journalist that's gone and taken the specific statement in a line of context, and he's placed that as the title of the article. But I genuinely feel like it's a bit of a free-for-all at the moment. And if I could just say on the Bilal Muhammad Leon Edwards fight, I think that's an absolutely brilliant fight. And it would probably be, like, from a purely competitive standpoint, a more competitive fight than if you do a Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler type fight, right? I agree with you that Conor brings the blockbuster, whatever. But that's a very, very competitive, very interesting fight, just from a sort of a technical standpoint. But I entirely see your point about the heavyweights, where heavyweight, you are more able to roll off the couch at 2 weeks notice, 3 weeks notice, whatever it is. But boy, oh boy, if they call big Tommy Aspinall up to fight for that UFC 300 main event, they are going to have to pay for it. You know, you're going to have to pay for it.
I think you have to pay for it no matter who they get in at this stage, because I'm actually surprised how public all of this kind of hardship the UFC are going through is, because, like you said, Conor McGregor is probably looking from the outside in, waiting for a call. So is Leon Edwards now, and everyone are going to be using the struggle to put together this main event as a bargaining tool, especially when we're about 7 weeks out, and you got to pay for the late notice, because I would consider this late notice, not super late notice. Okay, there's late notice when you come in on 1 week notice, but ideally you want that 8 to 12 week period already. And like you said, maybe a couple of people are already going through that period, but the UFC have really put themselves into a sticky hole here in trying to put this main event together, when John Jones knows exactly what he's doing by coming out and saying that the UFC offered him that fight, because he's giving everybody else an extra few quid on top of what they're going to be earning already by saying that, we're close to putting this main event together. Dana White is like, well, you just asked John Jones and you refused 3 days ago, son. So you're not really that close, and you're scrambling. And it's very un UFC like to be in a situation like this, really. And we've been talking about it for the last number of years, is the UFC's lack of wanting to create stars like Conor McGregor. And it's really showing to be hurting them in stages like this, when they have other stars on other cards, and that lack of, big names or hype type fighters, which we would have had in abundance back in the day, doesn't really exist right now. And I think they kind of wish it did in certain terms for this card. And I'm very interested to see what your thoughts on all of that.
So I mentioned to Shawnee there should be a Speaker's Corner episode where I actually think it's the easiest time in UFC history to become a star. And I won't divulge too much on that, because we're going to do that on a Speaker's Corner episode at some point. But I think for the UFC, this isn't necessarily a lack of stars. I just think this is the UFC showing their arrogance. And the arrogance is that things just always fall into place, and so they will do. And so we're going to stack the deck at 298. We're going to stack the deck at 299, and UFC 300 will be the icing on the cake, because it just comes together for us. And it hasn't. Yeah. And these are the moments, like you say, that if Leon Edwards gets a call, it's not the main event they wanted. That's for sure. They wanted Johnny Bones Jones because he's Johnny Bones Jones. And that again, it's why I think all the roads lead to Conor McGregor. Now, I could be completely wrong, and they might look at this from a financial perspective too. And they say, let's say we have to pay Leon Edwards £1 million to fight at UFC 300, to take it on relatively short notice to do the Bilal Muhammad fight. They're going to have to pay Conor McGregor a significantly more than £1 million to fight at UFC 300, right? And so,
it's a brand new deal. If this is happening at this, it's a brand spanking new deal for Conor McGregor. Only has 2 fights left on his contract as well, which is another kind of avenue we could go down in terms of, yeah. I was going to say wrinkle there. I had to stop myself. Me and Harry have said the word wrinkle way too much this week so far, but how's it never? Looking at the card, one of the big things that UFC have done on Conor McGregor cards is not stack the undercard. Now, to be going against the grain by putting him on this card, but the reason that they have a Conor McGregor fight and then have a very kind of for lack of a better term, an underwhelming undercard, is because they don't want to pay pay-per-view points to anybody underneath there, because they know Conor McGregor is going to earn a lot. There's not earn a lot of pay-per-view views. There isn't anybody that I could see that would be earning pay-per-view points off this. I don't know about the BMF title. Like, I mean, I don't know whether that earns you pay-per-view points. Hopefully it does.
So Weili Zhang, Yan Zhuanan, they're both fighting for a title. So Weili Zhang's obviously earning pay-per-view points.
She might not be though. I wouldn't say there's no guarantee onto that now, because we remember Demetrius Johnson fought a bunch of fights without any pay-per-view points.
Yep.
If you're Weili Zhang and her team, yeah, you're wanting that. That's what you want to have in your contract, but there's no guarantee on that either. At the same time, I don't know if all championship clauses would be probably a question to ask someone who knows UFC contracts a hell of a lot better, whether every single title has a contract or a pay-per-view clause on it. Because you could just they could just up your base show money and not pay you pay-per-view points either. So there is that as well. So it's something that, the UFC will be thinking about as well. But they have 2 fights left to go on this card, a main event and another mid-range fight. I say you do. I wanted like Izzy versus Bahia at like heavyweight. I think it's too soon for that to happen now. The likelihood is more so Izzy versus Dricus would be the one. And then, I don't know, you could even put another title fight on there, but they're not going to do that. I'm very interested to see what happens here. It's like there's a lot of moving parts.
The other thing they could do, right? And this will never, ever, ever happen, but I'm just putting it out there, right?
Yeah.
If this is Jim Miller's retirement fight, you make Jim Miller Bobby Green the main event.
That's bona fide madness, sir.
It is. It is. But and it will not sell outside of the hardcores, obviously. But if you're looking, and just my 2 pence.
That's wild statement. That's wild. I'm curious to hear your justification.
Like, if you're looking, the UFC at the moment have got a lot of vitriol for not looking after fighters, not creating stars, not doing this, not doing that. The whole story of UFC 300 is that Jim Miller has fought 100, 200, 300. Because right now there isn't a narrative behind it. When you don't have a main event, a solid main event on a card of the stature of UFC 300, then you don't have a narrative for the card. So the narrative, at least for me, for UFC 300, and I think the narrative for most of the hardcore fans outside of they can't book a main event, is Jim Miller's fucking fighting on the card for 100, 200, 300. And you have a story there already to sell. Now, are they going to do it? Absolutely fucking not. There's no way. They put him as a feature prelim and that's it. And it is what it is. It is what it is. But if you're struggling that much, the UFC could bite the bullet and say, well, we're going to send this fella off in the biggest way possible. And of course they won't do it. But if you are struggling, and maybe Mr. Conor McGregor says no, Mr. Ezra Adesanya says no, and Mr. Leon Edwards says no, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do?
Very, very interesting. I think, it's either going to be Izzy versus Dricus, or I think they'll just cut their losses and put that Leon versus Bilal fight on there. Like, the rumors, obviously Chimaev has come out and said that, he's not going to be fighting during Ramadan. There's rumors that they're looking to try and get him back down to 170 to take on Leon Edwards, which would be a massive disrespect towards Bilal Muhammad, obviously, and a big, big risk too, because the last time they put Chimaev in that position for a main event, he came in at 9.5 pounds overweight. So I think it's a big gamble that you take there. And you don't need fight, like they already dealt with a lot of fight fallouts for UFC 200. I guess they don't want to try and go through the motions and dealing with that kind of stuff as well. Not beyond the realms of possibility that we might have, but we only have one kind of pay-per-view after this 299. Do we have a late fallout or a quote-unquote injury from the main event of maybe 299 that gets moved to UFC 300? You never know what may happen in the mad, mad world of mixed martial arts. But this is a very interesting story that's developing. I think we will have an end result pretty soon. I think it's got to be done close to the end of this week with tickets going on sale. So very, very curious to hear what is going to happen and what the UFC pull out with the bag. They do also, Harry, we have to give them credit. Like, in moments like this, they always seem to work it out and make it happen. and pull something out of the fire, but the roads are closing, the avenues are getting smaller, and the opportunities are getting a little bit more harder to pull together. That was the balance breakdown for this week. Be at BJJ_Harry Powell. Head over there and read the Severe Spotlight on SevereMMA.com. Rodolfo Vieira. You got a tidbit of Harry waxing lyrical about it. See what he did when he put pen to paper and breaking down his performance. We'll be back later on for the Severe setup this week on Thursday, episode 6, full breakdown of the huge card coming this weekend, UFC 298, Alexander Volkanovski versus Ilia Topuria. Ian Garry also fighting on that card as well. Until then, take care, enjoy it. We'll see you soon.